Good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Hynes. I'm curator of film at Museum of the Moving Image in New York. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for this conversation with Jeanie Finlay. This is in conjunction with our month-long retrospective of Jeanie's films, People Every Day, the films of Jeanie Finlay. And this is also in timed with the release, virtual theatrical release of her film Seahorse, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2019. And is one of my very favorite films of the year. My enthusiasm for that film and for Jeanie's films in general led us to this opportunity of being able to show her films online. Jeanie's films, a lot of her films have been online through her own site and will be available, at least some of them, or most of them, going forward. And I want to sort of like, even though we get to show these films for the month, they will be viewable in various ways going forward. So please continue to discover them even beyond the next several weeks. It's the release of Seahorse, like I said, is an opportunity to look at Jeanie's films. I think that one of the things that we can do at a place like Museum of the Moving Image is to call out filmmakers who have been doing really exciting work for recent times, and in a sense doing a mid-career or even an early career retrospective, so that we don't have to wait too long before we call out the really excellent work that's being done. And we've been doing a lot of programming over the last several years for nonfiction at the museum, and Jeanie's films have been a highlight on the festival tour over the last several years. So anyway, long bumbling introduction, but just want to say thank you so much, Jeanie, for being here and for allowing us to show your films this month.
Oh my goodness, thank you. So it's a real honor for you to group everything together. It's so lovely. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you.
Have you, is this the first retrospective of your work? Has there been a version of some sort anywhere else in the world?
I've done like, I'm really lucky to be based at a cinema, and they're really good to me. I'm based at Broadway Cinema in Nottingham, and I've been there many, many years. Used to work there before I even had an office there. Used to run the kitchen and be an usher and box office manager. But they've been super supportive. So they've run like retrospectives when I've launched a new film. So they'll show the last few films, but it's never been like everything. And you know, and I went up to Mark Commode, the film critic in the UK, has a film festival in Shetland. So I went there last year and we showed, I showed 3 films, which was really lovely. It was just really nice. But I've never had the opportunity to show like everything and like lay it all out. So that's been a real treat. It's just quite, I just sort of look back and go, oh God, yeah, I've made quite a bit of work without noticing, because I've just been getting on and making the films.
That's what I was wondering, if you're just getting on and making the films, if you do stop and look back and think about your work as a group, as a filmography.
I don't know, I guess I think about my practice, and I think about how you make the films, and I try and learn a lot on every film. And I'm a firm believer in, you just get the film out there when it's finished. So you don't, you know, I'd rather just get it finished and get it complete and get it out in the world, rather than worry too much about if it's perfect. And just think it's a little time capsule of how I was feeling at that moment and the people that I met and the things that I was exploring. And then, you know, you look back, and like a film like Sound It Out, I made in 2011 for about, it was so cheap. I made it for like $9,000, crowdfunded $9,000. And, you know, it's very shonky in DIY, but the shop itself, Tom wouldn't mind me saying, it's very shonky in DIY. So the way I made it really fit the aesthetic of the film. And I look at it now and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm reaching for the focus. But in a way I sort of don't, I love it even though it's flawed, because it taught me so much and it was so joyful. And then it's like, you make the next film, you learn more and you learn more, and you learn on everything all the time, I think.
And I don't want to sort of presume an opinion on this, but can there sometimes be such a thing as a danger of knowing too much and learning too much? There's something about seeing Sound It Out and the sort of sense of discovery and true observation, truly being in that space, getting to know and having the film feel like that space, which would be, it would be unfortunate if if your craft had honed to the point where that was no longer possible?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think it was just exactly the right film for me to make at that point. All the films I make are like, I was going to say they're like personal horcruxes, but I don't particularly want to refer to Harry Potter right now. But they're sort of like emotional parts of yourself, and I put so much into my films that I think really carefully about what the stories I want to make are. And when I was making Sound It Out, my mum had breast cancer, so I was spending a lot of time at home, and it wasn't fun at all. It was a terrible time, and so I'd go and visit Tom in the shop and joke, "Oh, I'm gonna make a film about your shop." I'd sort of look around. It was such a haven for me as this amazing place, this salvation at the time. And it was like that for everyone. And I just thought, I just need to do this now. And I'd been stuck in lawyers' offices trying to sort out the Great Hip Hop Hoax. And I was like, I can't wait. If I'm going to be a filmmaker, I need to make a film. Rather just try it out. And I bought this new camera. And the previous film I'd made, Goth Cruise, was with 2 units. So I had 2 really skilled camera people working. And I didn't touch the camera, and you don't hear my voice. And then when I started to make Sound It Out, I just thought, I'm just going to give it a go and just see. And yeah, I don't mind those bits where I'm trying to find the focus. I found the person, and I just want to get there. I think it's okay.
I think that feels like your films in general. I mean, I know that there were films were filmed differently in a different manner, and they have different forms. But yeah, I mean, I feel like you being present in the room is a big part of a lot of what your films are, And so seeing somebody reach for that focus feels right, because that's a person in the room looking to, I don't know, like we see your thinking and we see your trying, and I feel like that's a big part of what your films feel like.
I feel like I really sort of learnt to embrace that, though, because at the beginning I was an artist who I'd made work for galleries and online. I was like a secret nerd who learned how to code websites really early on. So I used to publish a lot of my work online and do installation work, large scale video installation and objects, whatever. And then when I moved into film, I made the leap from a 10-minute short to a 60-minute film with Keeneland. And it was so instinctive that, and I felt scared to allow people to hear my voice. I felt like I was in every frame, so it was unnecessary. But then we Sound It Out, it just felt like it was important. And then I've always had my voice in the films, because I don't believe in fly on the wall filmmaking. A lot of the time if I'm filming, I still work with crew, but if I'm filming, I'm a 5'7" woman, I'm not small. I've got a large camera, I'm not a fly. The film is about the relationship and chemistry and intimacy that grows over the process of making the film, of the people that I'm working with. And often I'm working with very, I choose to focus on very shy people who may have never told their story before. And so my presence this is a story that might not have been told before. So it seems important to refer to the process and just not pretend that this story didn't just fall out of the sky. There was a question asked and people responded, or I'm observing the moment and then going in and just interrogating that a bit, or yeah.
Well, I feel like you ask questions, you actually ask questions, you're sometimes heard asking questions, but I feel like there's a genuine curiosity to your films. I don't get a sense that somebody's being packaged for me, that there is a predetermined notion of the people that I'm encountering, and that you are figuring out how to present them. I feel like you're interrogating, that sometimes has like a negative connotation, or but I think there's an honesty to that too. Like you are interrogating the image, you're interrogating the person, you're looking for an answer that you don't actually know beforehand.
Oh yeah, when I first in my first film, I wrote all my questions down, and I used to ask the question off the list, and then I'd never do that now. I research my films very heavily and I think very deeply about them, but you've got to respond to what's happening. And often when people say something, it's the thing that they half say is the thing that's actually interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to sort of, you know, follow that, or you follow things and they're like, oh, this bit isn't interesting. It's like, it is, that's the most interesting thing. So we focus on that. And I love that. The thing about making documentary for me is being able to be in the moment and see what's really happening, not what you imagine. And I sort of enjoy, I've been editing all day today with Alice, my editor I work with a lot, Alice Powell, and I really enjoy like setting up a sort of stereotype or playing on an idea that you might have had at the beginning and then completely undercutting it as you get to know, because, you know, human beings are complex and different and they're not what you may have imagined. And I think it's important to reflect that journey in all of the films, really.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about how you got into this, because I know that you didn't start as a filmmaker, and you described how you're a photographer and artist and musician. And so the idea of you becoming, I think I've heard you mention this quite a bit, and it seems to be defining. The fact that you didn't start this way, but you ended here, seems to remain a big part of how you think of yourself as a filmmaker. And I'm wondering what that's about.
I studied, I went to art school. I loved painting and installation. And then I studied contemporary arts and music. So I used to play it, you know, it's my cello, I actually play it. You know, I wrote music and performed a lot of music, but I knew quite early on that being a musician was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell stories, and I started making artwork, and this desire to tell stories was something that was quite difficult to do in artwork. I found it quite frustrating, and I did a lot of participatory work or like people-led practice. So I would, you know, get 500 anonymous responses from people about the loves that they lost, and then program those love stories into the neon signs that you have in bus stops. Or so I liked the idea of engaging with emotion in the world. Anyway, it's a very long answer, but the idea of, if you're an artist, you can do anything. It can be anything. And we used to do, alongside making artwork, we used to do graphics and print and help translate that story, build early websites. And so making a film, it just feels like every element of the film is the work. And so it means that when I'm making a film, if you come at it as an artist, I feel like I make artworks that live in the cinema or live on the telly. You know, you can use any means to make an image. And I've spent a lot of time, like when I was making Seahorse, I felt like the biggest challenge with Seahorse, you know, I'm telling the story of Freddie McConnell, the trans guy having a baby. And I imagined that the biggest challenge he would face would be pregnancy. What's pregnancy going to be like? But actually, the biggest challenge he sort of faced was dysphoria, gender dysphoria, because he stopped taking testosterone. And that's something I can never experience as a cis woman. What is that like? But I could reflect on how I felt, and I would run every morning and sort of meditate on the film, allow it to sort of come into my brain and think about the images that would help me translate that story. The story of dysphoria, and then go and create the images. I sort of feel like as an artist, that just feels supernatural to do. So it's a very sort of reflective process. I film a bit, I look at it, I collaborate with the editor, I go back and create more imagery, and we really layer it up, and then work with the musicians or the sound artists to really, so every element is making the goal of one piece of work.
Sure.
And the audience doesn't need to know any of that. Hopefully they don't think about that at all when they're watching it. It just feels right. I want them to feel emotion.
But there's also there's a kind of outward facing exploratory element here. Like what you just described could apply, or could the material for what you're describing could involve something that's fictional and scripted, but that's not where you're oriented. So, you know, why are you sort of externally oriented?
I don't know. I mean, it just feels natural. Like there was a point when I started making films where I was like, this is what I should do. I should just do this. Because there was the fact that an audience engages with the work is really important to me. And I think I saw, when I made Teenland, I sent it off to, I think it was 200 film festivals, and it got into one in Missoula, Montana, Big Sky. So I went out to Big Sky and I watched an audience watch my film in this tiny place where David Lynch grew up. And the audience reacted. I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. It just felt like the moment of emotional response completes the work. And it felt so important. And I've always been drawn to documentary nonfiction because I love the idea of finding something magical in something that you've seen, that you may have passed on the street, or someone you may have met many times before, but there's an unlocking of something that you have to just look at things in a slightly different way. I'm not sure I'm articulating this properly, but it's that idea of, finding something magical in something that may just seem unremarkable on the surface.
We were talking about how at your Goth Cruise you had, which is from 2008. So that's like basically your second feature. And how you had camera people filming for that, and then for Sound It Out you went back to shooting on your own, and the decision to have, well, I mean, Goth Cruise, in a sense, in terms of, for those who haven't seen it, it is indeed going on a cruise ship and following a cohort of goths or self-identified goths over several weeks, 10 days, I forget how long
it was. Not that long, it was like 5 days.
5 days.
5-day cruise to Bermuda with 150 goths and 2,500 norms. And the norms were basically...
But that was the fact that there are norms there is a big part of the...
Oh, yeah. I mean, I went to a wedding of an old friend who'd been at school, and she was like a big Susie Sue goth. And I saw her in her 40s. It was like my best friend's older sister. And I saw her in her 40s just looking amazing. And it just made me think, what is it about goth that people cling to and identify with, or that would speak to them into adulthood? So I started making this film called Goth Till I Die, and I came home from work and my husband Stephen said, I found it, it's the Goth Cruise. And just the idea of, can you be at your most goth on a neon lit floating shopping centre, basically? And then it just sort of went on the journey to try and track down, because there was 2 goth cruises. It was like, which one was I going to focus on? And then finding the people who had a story that you could tell over so the cruise is just an excuse to get to know some people.
It's very you, in the sense that, like, there's something about there's a hook to it, right? There's a real hook that makes you curious about finding out about this, and then what you find out are these sort of incredibly human, relatable backstories for all of these people. Not that they're all sort of like, not like everybody's like everyone else. We're all very, very different from one another, but there's a way in which the hook is a kind of a false tease to the idea that what you actually find out about everyone is that they're, it's there's nothing salacious or exploitative about this whatsoever. And you spend as much time with folks off the boat as you spend with them on the boat in terms of the runtime of the film.
Sure, yeah. I ended up, the film got commissioned super quickly. I almost got whiplash. It was like, I filmed a pilot. I think I pitched it. I worked with a production company, Tiger Lily Films. It was pitched to IFC. I think I was like out shooting a pilot within 3 months.
Wow.
And I think that I really benefited from being an artist. When I came to make my first film, I was a director straight away. So I hadn't done all this lather, making tea for people. I was just a director. So making a second film, I was like, yeah, come on, let's do it. Let's just do it. But it was scary. It was terrifying. And I took crew with me that my husband shot Goth Cruise. The other cameraman Mark shoots most of the stuff that I work on now. But, you know, I've got like 4 or 5 camera people that I work with who are really skilled at different things.
Mm.
You know, so they'll, you know, I'll have someone who's a really good person if you're doing an interview, or, you know, I'm also been training, I'm mentoring a Northern Irish filmmaker called Sian McElwain, who was a production assistant on Game of Thrones, The Last Watch. And I just didn't want her to end up producing work for terrible men. I wanted her to be a director because she's got great stories to tell. So we trained her on how to use the camera.
Okay.
When we were shooting there. And also, you know, my teams are now predominantly women. So Mark is usually an outlier in a crew full of, I think on my last 2 films I had like 68, 70% female crew.
Great.
But I mean, the crews are tiny. I mean, tiny.
Well, I guess that's what I was going to try to get at, thinking about what you were doing in terms of how the makeup of the team for Goth Cruise leading into Sound It Out, which is super intimate and basically just you.
It was me, and then Stephen came and helped me shoot some of the landscapes. But we had like, my dad drove us round to get all the locations. Basically drove me to all the places that I used to go when I was at art college in Middlesbrough and look at Teesside, because it's quite a sort of extraordinary looking, it's just a strange place. It's a weird place. It's my home. It's weird.
Well, I was just going to say that there's something that feels like that's now the DNA or the kind of the core of how you make your films. And I'm wondering how you maintain that as you bring on collaborators and new people come on the team. How does it still feel like you? How does it still have that intimacy of, even if you're not holding the camera, it feels like you're holding the camera?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I've, you know, now I've made 8 features. I mean, after I made Goth Cruise, I set up my own production company, Glimmer Films. And it means it's really important to me that I can keep the promises that I make to the people I'm making films about, to all the crew. It's important to me that people get paid on time and are looked after. And I can do that if I'm a co-producer or a producer of my own work. And what I've done is if I work with people and we get on well, and I just want people who are going to really like give everything to I want a generosity in terms of creativity and towards the people that we're making films about, because they're giving us their stories. And my aim is that people will recognize themselves for good and bad when they watch the film. It should feel a bit uncomfortable. There should be something that feels uncomfortable. Otherwise I haven't really done my job, or it hasn't, you know, it's not a puff piece. But yeah, I want people who can help me deliver that with, you know, make films of integrity, really. So there's some people, you know, Pip Norton, she's mixed everything since Goth Cruise, because I love her. She's amazing. She's just brilliant at what she does. Graham Langley's my long-suffering music supervisor. So when I phone him up and say, Graham, I need David Bowie for the end of Seahorse and haven't got any money, he'll make it happen. Or I need Barry Manilow for The Last Watch, and yeah, he made it happen. So yeah. So
I was going after one thing, but I feel like what you brought up is something else that's really, really interesting, is what you're saying in terms of creating you created a business, you created a production company, but in a sense you're creating a culture around what you're doing, a sense of being able to treat people properly and be able to sort of pay people in order to enable people's careers moving forward. I'm curious, like to how much, what are the conversations around a potential project going forward? Do you have conversations with others about what you might decide to work on? Do you, over the course of production, are you figuring out the shape of what it's going to become? Are you talking to the composer while you're shooting? I'm just curious, like, and it's a big category, but I'm curious about the levels of collaboration and where they start and if they're sort of throughout production and post-production.
So I guess as I've become more experienced, it's weirdly tighter in terms of my thinking and research and planning, but the shoots are much more loose. It's very loosey-goosey. It's like I have an idea of what I might want to film, but I also block out a lot of time so we can respond to what's happening. you know, that's difficult when I'm making films in another country sometimes, but just having that time, you know, if someone says something amazing, you go, right, let's go and film that. That's like my favorite thing in the world. Let's just go and shoot that. Can we make that happen? So what I do is a lot of visual storyboarding. Everyone on the team gets access. I've started using Google Keep. So I have all these like massive master files of paintings and other films and photography and things that I'm interested in. Or, you know, when I'm out running, I take a lot of photographs and then put them, and then just sleep on it, think about it a lot, to enable me to be present when I'm filming, and then loose enough to respond to things that are actually happening, if that makes sense.
It does.
But for example, I'm cutting a pilot at the moment for a film which we've shot quite a bit of, but we've had to stall because of COVID. But like, I've been filming stuff today that I'm going to put in. I like was filming some stuff in my garden I'm going to use, and I'm collaborating with the person that the film is about, and she has been. I left an HD camera in America because I was so confident I was going to be able to go back in March. So part of the process now is about her now shooting for me the film. You know, and we've Tara's been in on the Zoom, so we've been showing her. Tara's the composer, so we've been showing her the editing process, and she's been scoring to a pilot for a. When I say pilot, I just mean a teaser for a feature. So yeah, she's been scoring straight away. So she's developing the sound as we're developing the film. And what I really like doing now is putting edits in while I'm filming. So film a block, edit, talk to Alice Powell's amazing. So just want to talk to her, and because she's part of the process.
And that work doesn't forestall the sense of discovery on set. Doesn't forestall the possibility of being wide open.
No, I think it like blows it even further apart. Because also, I think when I first started, I was scared. It was like, I'm just going to shoot everything and not look at a frame. I think like I rewound a tape and we like erased a load of stuff when we were shooting Goth Cruise, and it just gave me the fear. And like with Sound It Out, I just shot it and then we just put it all in the edit. But now it's so much more reflective. Seahorse was like that. The Last Watch was like that, although with that we filmed 900 hours, so it was a whole thing. Orion was shot over 5 years because I just couldn't get the film funded. So whenever I'd be in the States for a screening of The Great Hip Hop Hoax or Sound It Out, like I'd be at South by Southwest, and then I'd go and film more interviews. I'd call up Stuart Copeland, who's cameraman I work with from Tennessee, and throw the camera in the car, go and get another interview, because it was all around the South, so Alabama, Selma, all these like small towns in the back end of beyond. So just go and get just get it by hook or by crook.
People don't realize that. They look at a filmography, they look at sort of like a course of years and what was produced during that time. They don't quite realize that sometimes certain films take 5 years to make and certain films take 6 months to make, and they're happening simultaneously.
Oh yeah, they just happen it's weird, like at one point I was like releasing a film every year and a half. Like I'd have a film out a year or a year and a half, but actually I'd been making them all at the same time for a long time. I started making Orion before it was going to be my second film, and then it didn't happen. I tried to make The Great Hip Hop Hoax, made Sound It Out. The guy from Sound It Out came to a special screening. Sorry, the guy from The Great Hip Hop Hoax came to a special screening of Sound It Out at Rough Trade in London, and went, yeah, this is really cool. Do you want to make that hip hop film again? Because he'd been tied up with another deal. And then he was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. So we had the money raised. We just went straight into production.
What is there something deliberate, or is it more organic? The sense that you kind of toggle between projects that are UK based, that's where maybe Northern England versus things that are US. And I know the thing that you're talking about that you're making a teaser for is US based, and obviously Irvine is US based. Was that a choice to sort of not limit yourself to one or the other, or has it just kind of worked out that way?
It's kind of worked out that way, and sometimes I think like I like making a big film than a smaller film or a more structured film. Like I started making Panto. Like I really wanted to make that film. I just went to see, it's my local pantomime. It's the theatre opposite the cinema where I'm based. I was just like, I'm obsessed. I've got to do this film. And it was like so low budget. And then like I would be editing The Great Hip Hop Hoax all day. And then I'd go and film the Panto rehearsals in the evening. And it was really good because it helped me think about hip hop hoax. Like it flexed another bit of my brain. Because I just get bored. I want to be on the next project or thinking about something. Like I've got 2 more projects that I'm sort of tinkering away with at the same time as doing my pilot at the moment.
Nice.
Because it keeps it fun. And
I know so many filmmakers who, once they've completed something, if they have not figured out how to begin the next thing, how that can be a really debilitating period where you're then, I mean, this is out the window at the moment, but you know, you're on the festival tour and, you know, like that could take up upwards of a year or so. And there can be a real come down if that ends and there's not the next thing. And I think that ideally it could work out where your editing brain is being engaged by one project and you're shooting in the field for another project. There's something about that seems really useful in terms of keeping yourself from kind of running aground.
Yeah, it does. But I've also got to be like, I took 2 months off last year because I was so knackered. Like I
love the idea of taking time off as 2 months for you. I mean, come on.
I made Seahorse and Game of Thrones The Last Watch simultaneously, and it was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, even just the promo on those films, or just like when The Last Watch went out on TV, because I knew that I'd made, for people who haven't seen it, it's about, you know, I was embedded on the final season of Game of Thrones. I didn't know Game of Thrones inside out, but I very rarely say yes. I've only ever said yes to Freddie McConnell and HBO when they asked me to do that film. But it's just such a pop culture behemoth, I had to do it. And I loved the idea of really focusing on really different sort of characters that you would usually see on a behind the scenes special. But it was it was just full on. There's 2,000 people on set. They worked round the clock. And also just going through that machine, this huge beast of sort of saying, I want to tell these stories. And I mean, when I think back, I'm just like, oh my God. Like I sort of said to them, I need 4 months where you just let me wander around set and just leave me be and just let me get on with it, because that's what I need to do. And they were like, okay. They were so like respectful and allowed me the freedom to do that. I was sort of astonished at myself for sort of asking for it, but also that they went for it and were like, yeah, fine.
That seems like the key to you making your film too. Like I can't imagine you would have been able to make a Jeanie Finlay film if you hadn't been able to do that.
Oh yeah, it would have been really terrible. And it was so, the environment was so distracting because there was just like fire and stuntmen and dragons and famous actors and fans and craziness. To actually be able to focus and know what my take on this was without anyone else sort of editorializing that was so important. And to translate, because I had a team of 8 people to help gather everything. So actually being able to bring them on and to understand what it is that I wanted to achieve. They didn't always get it, but they did in the end.
Do you see any crossover or similarity between The Last Watch and Panto?
Massively, hugely. I made all the crew watch Panto. So with Panto, it was quite interesting because I knew as soon as I started following them and I realised that because of economic the economic problems. This is the lowest budget pantomime in Nottingham, all with amateur dramatic actors. So I was immediately intrigued by, well, what's their other life? So, you know, the pantomime dame who hates Christmas, and the stage manager who shouts at everyone and who gets super stressed out, and the the props lady who's just had a cataract done, so she keeps losing everything. It's just, I was just like, oh, this is just, it was like a love letter to where Nottingham, where I live. So when I was making that, I was just like, this is about their challenge of just, you know, actually achieving this thing in less rehearsal time than they needed with a budget of 10 pence. When I went to Game of Thrones, I kept looking for there to be is there going to be a disaster? And it became apparent really quickly that if there was a problem, someone would just throw some money at it and there would be more people. So it wasn't ever going to be about, can they do it? Of course they can do it. It's a behemoth. Mm-hmm. But it's like, what is the toll on people to do that, to make that, you know? And I think both films are about the storms in teacups. At the heart of what's the human toll on making something creative. Mm-hmm. How do you do it? Why persist with this lunacy? It's, you know, it's madness, but then it's sort of intoxicating and amazing, you know. And I met people like Dell, who brings the snow to King's Landing. You know, everyone knows winter's coming, but here's Dell, he actually brings the snow. And I kept meeting the Night King in the local shop. Vladimir, the stuntman, this like softly spoken, lovely stunty. And I kept thinking, he looks really familiar. And then I realized he was the Night King. And his biggest villain in the world is actually this sweet guy. I was like, I have to focus on him.
That's wonderful. I mean, so I want to say that the Last Watch is the one film that you've made that is not available in our retrospective. The folks at HBO were super wonderful about trying to figure out ways of doing it, but because we're in the online space and the film is available through HBO Max, it is available there. If and when we get back into the building, we're talking about being able to show the film for an audience, which I'm excited to do. But also I just want to say, like, of the films the one film I had not encountered, I think the two films I'd not encountered of yours were Goth Cruise, which I was really excited to see, and Panto I hadn't seen. And I'm just absolutely enraptured with that film. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. And again, like, there's this, I know this is not necessarily like, there's no shtick here. It's you, but there's a way in which you get it. Maybe you glean maybe you get a slug line of what Panto might be, and you expect a Christopher Guest film. And it's not like there's no element of that. There's a little bit of an element there, but what if a Christopher Guest film was filled with people who were all in on the joke, and they were all self-reflective and all fully know what you might think of them? It does not change the fact that they desperately care about this thing, and this is something, this is a place of passion. So it truly winds up being in a sense inseparable from the experience of people making art in any other environment, except more pure, because it is purely doing it for the love of it.
Yeah, I mean, I go to see the Panto every single year. I still go, and they still make a massive fuss. So they always, like, the dame always singles me out, and the people who were in the film really love it and always watch it and have a big party. And I feel so, that was a film where I could literally see the film just happening in front of my eyes. You know, sometimes films, the desire to make a film just sort of filters in over a long period of time. But I remember going to see Panto and just having this sort of like flash in the interval and going, I'm going to make this film. I think I was like looking on stage, and there was a guy so handsome he made your eyes hurt, and then there was just like these two girls. It was just so, there was the full gamut of talent on stage, from could have been in Broadway to only on this stage in this moment. And I was like, this is tremendous. What happens when they step off the stage? Because the idea of stepping into the spotlight and you become someone else. And I don't know, I kept thinking about karaoke performances when people shine for 3 minutes. And yeah, I love that film so much. And it's so weird because it's Christmas, it only gets like occasional outings, but yeah, it makes my heart hurt even just thinking about it.
It's a beautiful film. There's a, I want to talk a little bit about Seahorse in a minute, but I just want in pre-Seahorse, or you know, up through the last watch, there's a thread in your films of the culture around an object of culture, or the culture around art making, whether it's the stories behind the making of it, or even just the sort of the economics around it and the relationships that develop around that. And I think that knowing a little bit about your past and where you began and your academic background, that's not a huge shock, but it also seems unique, because I don't think that there's been consistently this beaded approach to different ways that we gather around making or listening, or, you know, the idea of, in one respect, we're finding out about the sort of lives around people who put on a show, or the lives around people who make a spectacle of themselves, but there's also the lives around people who listen to music and their entire passion is sort of responsive to what somebody else is making. These aren't necessarily the first thought for people to make a film about these things, and you seem really, really adept at kind of sort of fleshing these out.
Yeah, I think it's something I've just always been really interested in. You know, although I had this sort of moment where I knew I was going to make Sound It Out because it was about my home. I'd been making an artwork, which I sort of started making and then I stopped making, called Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want, where I filmed people doing karaoke. It was like perform the song of your life on stage for 3 minutes, and I held all these karaoke competitions and filmed people being someone else for 3 minutes. And I love the idea of someone else's song helping to map the story of your life and how you connect with, you know, Bobby Gentry or Dolly Parton, or so I filmed a young lad who was really obsessed with Freddie Mercury. Anyway, so the element that remains in Sound It Out is you see people listening to the song that tells the story of their life. And I love that exchange of listening to someone else's work, and how, you know, I feel like with you know, with records, I sometimes feel like when people put a record on a shelf, it helps them feel more like themselves. And I'm interested in that. Like, in a way, I'm not interested in record shops. It was interesting when the film came out, we did a lot of screenings in record shops, and in lots of cities all over the world, people go, oh my God, you've got to go to this record shop. And I was like, I'm not actually interested in records. I collect stories. Yeah. So that was, yeah, it's quite interesting. Mm-hmm. You know, and I got approached by a lot of record stores afterwards saying, come and make a film about my shop. And I was like, yeah, but you're not the shop in the town where I grew up.
Right.
You know, I want to make a film about the Northeast, and this is my excuse. Right. This is the vehicle. Right. And it would only work if Tom was the guy who runs that shop, because he's the master. You know, Tom is someone I went to school with who was very shy and quiet at school, and then when I met him later, he was like master of his domain in his own way that everyone loved and came to. And it's like, that's great. I want to make that film about him at this moment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, with like, you know, Orion's a film about lying and desire, and The Great Hip Hop Hoax, which I developed at the same time, is about, they're all about trying on an identity. Mm-hmm. They're just more exaggerated, so it enabled me to explore something else. Like, Jimmy Ellis wore a mask and people believed that he might just be Elvis back from the dead, which is sort of audacious scheme. I love the idea that it's like this wafer thin scheme that's held together by desire.
Sure.
And then with The Great Hip Hop Hoax, 2 Scottish rappers couldn't get a record deal, so they pretended to be American with accents they'd heard on MTV. And, you know, my dad's Scottish, and I talked to my dad about it, and he was like, why on earth would you ever want to be not Scottish? That's ridiculous. And yeah, just the idea of how like appealing American culture is if you're living in a small town in Scotland. And they did, you know, they had stupid American accents. They were terrible.
Mhm.
They said they were from Hemet in California. Like I've been there recently, and I was like, what? They chose this place to be? This is crazy. It's just implausible. But that idea that you can lie, you can bring a fantasy to life just by lying.
And
So that's,
potentially becoming a version of yourself that way too, a version that you can't be otherwise, and this is your way of getting there. You know,
yeah,
that's Orion is this incredibly tragic story because it's not until he gets to play that character, that he puts on that mask, that he gets to be what he's always wanted to be, but it's still not entirely him, and that's what's brings him down. And it's so interesting. And obviously so particular to that person in that moment, in the years after Elvis had died, and yet that tension, that inner tension of needing to put on a mask to become yourself and then still having ambivalence about that version is quite relatable.
yeah. I mean, I'm really interested in drag, and I thought a lot about drag in relation to Orion. I mean, Orion, I think, is the saddest film I've made. It's just completely tragic, and it came about completely accidentally. My husband and I collect a lot of books and records and go to car boot sales, and he found this record for £1 with this masked man on the cover, the golden record. Took it home and played it, and it was like, this is Elvis material that we've never heard. And then researched it and uncovered this sort of absolute tragedy of a Nashville roller coaster. So the thing I love about Orion, it was just an absolute exercise in excavation. Everything was a treat. It was like a discovery, and ended up in all these. Jimmy Ellis grew up in Orville, Alabama, which has got a population of 112. So we filmed there, and it was amazing. Saw places and things that I would never meet ever. I would never go to. The back bars of Nashville. It's it's always interesting. It's always like an adventure.
I love how that film, again, it's another film where going into it, I didn't quite know where you were going to take me, because you almost assume or kind of settle into the idea that you might live in an archival space, that this might be a story about the past, that's using footage that you're editing that exists before. And such a huge part of the film for me are those present tense interviews from his hometown. Massive element of what emerges, and it winds up being crucial to understanding him.
Yeah, absolutely. We sort of brought this man to life on screen. It was only through talking to people that it really came to life for me. And also just like tracking down the archive, because this is I couldn't go to an archive house and find any of this. I had to engage with the fan community.
Oh, wow.
And with lots of fans talking to their children and getting them to scan in images. And I worked with the biggest Orion collector in the world lives in Norway, a guy called Kenneth Duckerberg. So I went to Oslo, and we sort of got this deal together where I would pay for it all to be transferred, and then he would let me use it in the film. So yeah, it was a whole journey.
Of all places, it led you to Oslo.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. If anybody there has a question and they want to contribute through the Q&A or the chat, please do so. But I want to sort of be able to cover where the most recent work here before we go too long. But I do want to say one last thing about that, relating that to Last Watch, having engaged with the fan community for working on that film, that prepare you at all for what you're about to deal with in terms of the fan community, in terms of Game of Thrones?
Oh my God, no. I mean, the thing that saved me making The Last Watch was that the film was a complete secret. So we had 5,000 signed NDAs. No one was allowed to speak about that the film even existed. And HBO announced that the documentary existed, I think, a month before the film played. I mean, I accidentally outed myself. There was a press release went out about Seahorse, and I'd given my new biog, which said, The Last Watch, blah, blah, blah. And I phoned up the publicist and I said, has this gone out to many people? I think it had gone out to 200 press people. So it very quickly had to be announced. It was announced within like an hour or something.
If you're going to
But
send it to 200 people that are going to cause trouble, it's going to be 200 members of the press.
But because no one knew it was happening, I felt like I could just make the film. So by the time it was announced, I'd already finished. The film was locked, loaded, done. But when it actually broadcast live, because it showed in 180 countries simultaneously, I was terrified. Like, we watched it, and because the reception to season 8 was not great, and we didn't know that when we were making the program, you know, we thought it's the biggest show in the world. So I was very braced to just get a load of abuse. But actually, I just got sent thousands of memes, which was amazing, which was just brilliant. It was so good. I loved it so much.
Memes based on your footage.
Yeah, memes of the film. People just loving Andrew McClay, the extra, and Dell, the snow guy, and Sarah, and Naomi, the sweary locations. But people just made thousands of memes, and that I just got thousands of messages. It was very, very, very overwhelming. Wow. and amazing. But it's like something I will never experience that again. It was just wild.
May that kind of force of response only be positive in your life. I hope nothing like that ever happens to anyone. Because when it's beautiful and supportive, that's wonderful. What in terms of like previous to like how often are you pitched or brought subjects, and how often are you finding them on your own? Seahorse is something that was brought to you.
Mm-hmm.
And how? So tell me how different that might have been from the other films, and why this was the one to maybe accept the challenge.
Yeah, Charlie Phillips, who's now head of documentary at The Guardian, used to be at Sheffield Documentary Festival. Charlie just said, "I'd really like you to meet Freddie. He wants to tell you about an idea for a film." And I went and met him, and he told me about his plans, that he wanted to get pregnant. He was going to stop testosterone, wanted to get pregnant, and wanted to tell his story. And I immediately just liked him, and also had a lot of questions. You know, my daughter's 16. I got my first film commission when I was 6 months pregnant. So I don't know, it just made me, it was an opportunity for me to reflect on what pregnancy meant for me, what being a parent meant for me. But also I just had so many questions about what this journey was going to be like for him. So I just bombarded him with a million questions, really. And he met with lots of directors. And then brought Grain on board, who'd made Vrunga and White Helmets. You know, they've won 2 Oscars, and so they brought Grain on board as Andrea Cornwall as the producer, and Orlando, and asked if I wanted to direct it. And I think because I was so intrigued, and I thought that it felt like there was just lots of things that I could explore and lots of questions, and I didn't know where it was going, but I was interested to find out. It meant that I really wanted to make this film. I sort of warned Freddie, if I do this, I'm all in. Are you prepared? Are you prepared for that? But I mean, I get pitched, as my films are more visible, I get approached a lot, and I've only said yes to Freddie and Game of Thrones. Everything else, it's not really been the right fit. Or, you know, I get pitched a lot of biopics about boring old men. I just don't want to do at all. There's got to be a story. The subject is not enough. That's just the beginning. And a lot of record labels want to invigorate. You know, they want to sell records, so they want a story, but there's no story. So it's like, I don't want to do it. It's not interesting enough. So,
Freddie, there's a word that you used earlier in the conversation that seems to apply to Freddie as well, and also is interesting, that you have the impulse that maybe other filmmakers may not, which is shy, and that you're actually interested in subjects that are shy. where for others that might be a warning sign that they're not going to get what they need. But so if you don't mind talking a little bit about that notion, but then also how it applies to Freddie, and what was exciting about the possibility of working with him, but then also what was challenging about that shyness.
I mean, I think I've even written it on my website now that I'm sort of interested in shy people telling small stories quietly. I think I found out really early on that the camera's a loudhailer, so someone doesn't need to shout for their story to be big. And actually, I'm interested in small change, or I think that's how you get intimacy. I'm not interested in show-offs or people who are very rehearsed at telling their story, because I think there's a magic where something happens because I'm there with the camera and it provokes a new thought, and the film sort of happens in this space in between. That doesn't happen if you are filming people who are very articulate all of the time, or people can be articulate, but it's about a provocation. And I also just feel like, I feel like an introvert who lives in this world where I have to make believe being an extrovert, in order to get my films made. So I'm naturally feel more comfortable with one-on-one or in like smaller, more intimate groups, but then, have to be quite single-minded to get the films made. With Freddie's probably the most British person I've ever met in my life. And there were various strategies that we had to sort of employ, because when I first started filming with him, quite often we would do something and then I would like talk to him on camera, and he didn't like it at all. He didn't want to do that. He wanted me to be just much more fly on the wall. I was like, I'm not a fly, so this is not the approach, but we need to find a way. And what we sort of discovered was that we would have these very sort of long and intimate phone calls that were really great. He was able to, when you're holding a phone, it's so close, it's easy to have that intimate connection. So we decided that I'd start recording the phone calls and start weaving those into the film. And so part of that's pragmatics. I lived 5 hours drive away from him, but partly it's just to find that intimacy. It's just finding a way of doing something that feels right for the person, that has to adjust with each film. So that was a challenge, and also when he was pregnant and his dysphoria was very acute, he felt terrible. And it's all you can start a film and feel great about it, but actually seeing it through, it's hard work. And being on camera it's exhausting. It's exhausting if you're behind the camera, but being in front of the camera, I think is really tough. Anyone's been doing Zoom calls all the time knows that. And so sometimes, what I ended up doing, I would just like block out quite a lot of time and just wait, and then spend small amounts of time with him, and then go and get more. So yeah, it was a lot of patience, and just waiting for the timing. Would I be there at the birth? Would I be able to film it? All those sorts. Nothing was certain. I had no idea whether it was going to work or not.
It's really important that we don't talk about what happens towards the end of that film, but if you've not seen Seahorse, please trust me, it's one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen in a movie. Please see the film for many, many reasons, but it's incredible. I think what you were just talking about is so, we talk about documentary subjects on camera in terms of performance all the time. There's always this sort of sense of like that we want to hone in on that aspect of it, but we never talk about exactly what you're saying, which is what it takes to allow you to, what it takes to sort of allow it to happen continuously. The work, just the sort of like the physical exertion that it takes, which no one knows how to talk about, to simply to be complicit over and over and over again to allow somebody to be there. And that's not necessarily about performance or not, but it is about complicity. It is about being aware and just sort of, having the strength to keep going and let it happen.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to come back to running, but it's like running a marathon. And sometimes sometimes you're at the finish line and it's amazing. Sometimes you're hurting. You're in pain and you're really far from the end. But also, you know, it's interesting because I want people to also trust me because I have got their best interests. I'm not going to ever stitch someone up, and will fight to protect a film from the people that put the money in to make it. You know, so you can make choices about who you take money from. You know, it's working with a broadcaster. I've worked with BBC many times and had really good experiences. But, you know, things can shift while you're making a film. You can get people move on, people get ill, you get different people come on board, and they can have very different editorial ideas. And so part of my job is to make sure that the film I want to make ends up like that, because it can get changed or cut right up until the last minute. So you have to really never let your guard down, really protect it. And make sure, you know, it's my job is to translate the film I want to make is the film that they also want as well. Right. Rather than making every choice. That gets, I was going to say it gets easier as I get more experience, but I think I just get more bullish about it.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, there's real pitfalls and dangers there. So the fact that you remain bullish about it, I think, is really, really important. You know, people are giving a lot to you, and to be able to protect that and protect your vision and their vision, or your collective vision for what it needs to be, is really, really important. There's some actually really fantastic questions that have come through. So I'm going to start with a few of these. Do you stay in touch with any of your subjects? Have you ever told, do you stay in touch with them? Which I feel like I know your answer is going to be. But then also, which is an interesting wrinkle here, have you ever told one of your subjects that you love them?
Oh, it's weird. Like if you go on my Facebook, if you scroll down my Facebook friends, almost every single person that I've ever made a film about is on there. So I've kept in touch with, almost everyone. I think like Teenland was pre-social media. It was like MySpace time. So I didn't really do that on that. We had like an informal Goth Cruise reunion a few weeks ago with some of the people from the film, which was very moving. I'd not watched it in so long. I remember watching going, oh yeah, this one's okay.
You and I talked about it. You were a little bit sheepish about it. I was like, no, this is actually really good.
I think I found it really hard to make. I had quite a hard time making it, and afterwards I just put it away. I was like, I'm just gonna put it in a box for a while. And then I got the master made for this, and was like, oh yeah, it's okay. It's fine. It's okay.
Wait, so is there a line by which would you tell somebody that you love them if they've made your film? Is that even an issue?
I would generally not tell people while I'm. I don't think I would tell people while I was actually filming, because I'm really. It's interesting. Like the latest film I'm making, I'm usually very boundaried about. I'm here to make a film. We will end up being friends. It's likely we'll end up being friends, but I don't want people to misinterpret openness as we're friends and you can just disclose everything, because I want people to remember that we're making a film. So I've often got the camera with me as like a visual contract. What's interesting though, with the film that I'm making at the moment, is that I've become friends with the person because it's just been going on for so long. You end up, I haven't heard people talk about this as well though, but really often you go on the road with people promoting a film, and so you end up like, that's where you really like form the friendship, is when you go on the road and you're drunk in a rave at South by Southwest in the middle of the night. I think I probably have told people that I love them. You know, I deeply love people, and also I end up feeling so intensely about the people in my films. You know, and Alice and I are always like you end up really loving like little tweaks or tics that people have, and really like loving those. Sure. Very much. Like you just become familiar with them and have little catchphrases that people say.
I think it says something about you that you get closer with your subjects when you go on the road with them, because I know a lot of filmmakers and subjects who've had the opposite experience,
Right.
traveling around. It's just a lot of time, all that time making a film, and then all that time living with the result of the film can be a lot. For a film like Goth Cruise or Panto, I wonder if you encountered any hesitation or fear from folks participating and how they would be portrayed. And if so, how do you address those fears given how stories' events might change? We talked a little bit about that in terms of how others might have a voice and you have to kind of protect them and yourself from that. But I'm curious about that sort of core conversation.
I mean, on Goth Cruise, because I was no one from nowhere when I was making Goth Cruise, so I just had to sort of show my enthusiasm for it, and I got to know people to make the film through LiveJournal, which, I mean, who knew? I spent a lot of time on LiveJournal trying to work out who was good, and loads of time on the phone, and then actually just going out there and meeting people. But I remember when I had to address all 150 goths at the beginning of the cruise, because we had to get everyone to sign clearances and introduce themselves. And there were a lot of people who were very hesitant. Some were lawyers that didn't want to be portrayed publicly. So we ended up just taking Polaroids and not showing those people. But quite a few people were super hesitant at the beginning.
Yeah.
And were like, no way, don't get that camera near me. And then would come over and go, oh, you're actually okay, and I trust you. You can put me in the film, it's fine. And with Panto, I'd made like quite a few films when I started making the film. So I'd made stuff that had been on TV or won awards or stuff. So but also I'm realistic about how well-known documentary makers are. But so I was there from right at the beginning of making the film. I remember like the Q&A for some of the people, some of the people were on stage, and someone asked in the Q&A, oh, were you a fan of Jeanie? And they were like, we had no idea who she was and that she'd made anything before, which I was like, oh my God, I would be astonished. I would watch everything that someone had done just to make sure that they're okay.
Sure.
But people didn't, they just trusted me, which is sort of wonderful, but also terrifying.
Right. I mean, I was going to ask you this before, which I think I pulled back because I think I know the answer, but like, it's hard to imagine you're being a wildly different version of what you're presenting to us right now when you're hearing these people for the first time. And so I think that goes a long way, I would imagine, towards engendering that trust.
Oh yeah, I just swear less when I'm filming people. Yeah. So I'm probably more, I have to be more outgoing. But if it's just one-on-one, then I'm just the same person. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also want them to know me as well, because this is an exchange. Mm-hmm. I'm not just someone who's turning up and just taking content. It's about an exchange, I think.
Sure. You and I talked about this being half an hour, and here we are 70 minutes in, and I've barely gotten past my own questions, but one more really good one, which I think I'm curious about this as well. Do you still paint? And if so, is it ever tied to or inspired by, however broadly speaking, what you're hoping to do visually in the film, with the films you're working on at the time?
It's not. My daughter has been painting, but she's been doing GCSE art and painting. I actually got told off for tinkering. She was asking me for some help, so I was like looking at it. I got some oil paints for Christmas, so I keep threatening to do that. But all my sort of creative energy in lockdown. I've been making this new film, and I've been mentoring people. But I've actually been gardening. I've just been growing loads and loads and loads of stuff and putting all my energy into the garden. I'm obsessed with the garden and cooking, but yeah, mainly gardening.
And but speaking of your artistic past, like, you are still making music and you still play, and you play on, as you told me just before we went on air, that you played on Seahorse.
Yeah. Tara, who wrote the score for Seahorse, is the first person I said hello to at university. And she's a brilliant musician and composer, and I've always wanted to work with her, and then this just felt like the the right project, like almost 20 something years later. And so she wrote the score. I worked with Saint Saviour as well, who's also in Sound It Out, and she's been in lots of my films as well. She's a brilliant musician. And yeah, Tara said, oh, I've written a cello part, are you going to come? So I was like, okay. So back in the studio with Tara is so great. I loved it so much.
And did you feel you weren't, I mean, have you ever recorded in that way, or when was the last time you did?
Oh yeah, I've done lots of, like I did, I mean, I don't play super regularly anymore. I used to. Back in the day, I'd be playing hours every day. I used to be in, I went to a big comprehensive school in Teesside, and it really valued the arts. I feel really passionate that I got free cello lessons till I was 18 every week, and I was part of Cleveland Cello Consort, which is 18 cellists all playing together. And so yeah, it's really important to me. And so, anyway, I pick up. I played on someone's album a couple of years ago, okay. But that's all like improv stuff. I used to like back in the day, I had a residency at like a dance night, a chill out garden in London at the Rocket. I used to play live cello in the chill out garden, and then I jam with whatever band was on stage that month. I mean, it was wild. It was crazy. It was a good time though. I loved playing, but I also knew that this was not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. There's other people who are just way more skilled than me at doing music.
Will we ever see anything from that karaoke project, or will there be another karaoke project?
No. I mean, I think it's interesting that karaoke is like the lifeblood of documentary. There's all these like single-minded introverts who let rip at karaoke. It's like my highlight of going to film festivals. That's what I miss most about film festivals, is doing karaoke with like Jessica Edwards, having a little sing with her and Gary Huswit.
Yeah,
it makes me so happy. Yeah, maybe I would like to do some more sort of artworks. I did a wraparound artwork to go with Orion, called I Am Orion, where we encouraged people to wear masks, and we had performances. A lot of the screenings, we had Orion abseiling down with acrobats and singing at one thing. It was sort of crazy. Yeah, it was really, I'm really interested in how you can, once you have the film, how you can also bring it out to an audience in different ways, and sort of like live performance.
Jeanie, we've covered a lot of ground, so I think we should probably leave it there for now. I always love talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you again somewhere along the way. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us after midnight where you are. But to repeat, Seahorse is available at the museum through the weekend, and then it is going to be available on VOD. So keep telling your friends about it to find it, even after it's left the museum. And then the retrospective goes on, I think, through the 3rd of July, and for an insanely reasonable price, I think $20, you can see all of them. So please spend some time with Jeanie's films this month. And we can't wait to see the project that you're working on now, Jeanie. Hopefully.
I'm so excited.
And thank you all for joining us out there in the world, whether you're here with us live or whether you're watching this recorded later on. Thanks so much for supporting the museum and for tuning in.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It's been a joy.
It's been a joy too. Bye, Jeanie.
Thank you.